Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha Television. Over the next half an hour, I'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events that have taken place around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Anti-social elements among new migrants in Germany to go on the rampage, raising a backlash from the right-wing opposition. Government frames more stringent deportation laws as Angela Merkel's liberal refugee policy comes in for flack. Tensions between the Koreas back to the pitch after a North hydrogen bomb test. US B-52 nuclear bomber does a fly past as a show of strength. South reiterates military alliance with America. Jakarta rattled by Islamic terror bombings and gunfire, the group's first attacks in Southeast Asia. 5 suicide militia among 7 killed, hunt on for deeper nexus and local support. And US President Barack Obama makes his last State of the Union address to the Congress. His annual report to the nation focuses on glossed over positives and personal regrets of his presidency. Well, our top focus on the program this week. Germany's migrant influx crisis took an ugly turn this week, with reports coming out of over 500 criminal cases filed against immigrant youth on New Year's Eve for crimes ranging from loot to molestation. On the back of strong protests against Chancellor Merkel, who had supported throwing open doors to migrants, Germany announced plans to make it easier to throw out foreign criminals and strip sex attackers of refugee status. Here's more.
Just a few days ago, they were helpless, homeless, pity-worthy refugees who had fled mayhem in their own homes and poured into Europe looking for a better life for their children. At least the majority of Germans saw them as such. More than 1.1 million people claimed asylum in Germany in 2015. But what happened during New Year's Eve celebrations in Cologne city centre turned that sympathy virtually on its head. City police said women filed 553 criminal complaints on that one evening against perpetrators almost exclusively from an immigrant background. Nearly half were of sexual assault, the rest of robbery, loot and rowdy behavior. Reports suggest a group of nearly 1,000 troublemakers, mostly North Africans and Arabs, had mobbed the gathering.
The problem is, of course, where did suddenly 1,000 people come from? They say that they were 1,000 North Africans and that they were not refugees. But where did they come from all of a sudden, in such a large amount? You do ask yourself that.
Immediately, the shockwave spread. Cologne police chief was removed for poor handling. Thousands of far-right protesters stepped up the heat, protesting Chancellor Angela Merkel's throwing open doors to refugees. A group of far-right extremists and football hooligans went on the rampage. Some 20 migrants from Pakistan and Syria were assaulted. Chancellor Angela Merkel, under pressure as the biggest champion for migrant rehabilitation, is now on the defensive.
Serial offenders who repeatedly rob or repeatedly affront women must feel the full force of the law. I believe that must become clear not only through words, otherwise people will ask us to back them up with actions, and so, of course, we will be discussing what needs to be changed with our coalition partners in the government.
The Justice Minister said Germany plans to lower the threshold for deportation and more criminal migrants would be expelled. Laws would be tightened. But even alongside these measures, there's the voice against succumbing to an anti-human stand. There remains a call for a humanistic spirit in the approach to Europe's migrant crisis.
I wish to reaffirm my conviction that Europe, aided by its great cultural and religious heritage, has the means to defend the centrality of the human person and to find the right balance between its twofold moral responsibility to protect the rights of its citizens and to ensure assistance and acceptance to migrants.
The issue of anti-social elements among the migrant hordes is having repercussions across Europe. A similar wave of sexual offences also reportedly occurred at a music event in Stockholm and was kept under wraps. It's a big dimension to the migration wave that's hit Europe this last year, raising needs adequate filtration to protect its own populations and order. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Joining me on the program right now to talk about this is former diplomat Shankar Mukherjee. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on the program. You know, Chancellor Angela Merkel has come under heavy criticism after what happened in Cologne, and her policy, her open door policy towards migrants has, in particular come under heavy criticism. Do you see Germany changing this policy maybe in the near future after what happened on New Year's Eve?
Well, even before the events in Cologne, which of course led to an upsurge of anti-immigration feeling, for years before that, anti-immigration opinion in Europe has always been simmering and sometimes coming out in the open, including in local politics. I mean, if you see the rise of the right-wing parties in France, Le Pen's party, in UK, the UK Independent Party, but this was mainly related to jobs, the fear that immigrants are, at a time when the world economy is almost static, and particularly after 2008, anti-immigrant feeling has always been very much there below the surface and occasionally rising above the surface with right-wing groups and right-wing political parties gaining ground.
But not so much in Germany, would you say?
But no, even in Germany, you've had quite a lot of right-wing opinion against, long before this refugee crisis, against the Turkish minority, which is the biggest minority there. Now, coming to these events, following the wave of refugees from Syria particularly, as well as other parts of the Middle East, and the continuing immigrant sort of wave after wave coming from North Africa and African countries, Angela Merkel stood out as an example of a liberal head of state in what is the most powerful country in Europe, standing up for human rights and welcoming refugees and stating that, we will take up to 1 million refugees, and more than 1 million have already come. And as I said, even before Cologne, it had become very clear that the immigration question, this wave of refugees was creating a political crisis in Europe, which dwarfed almost everything else. If you look just outside Germany, I mean, the countries where the refugees came first, Greece, and then the way towards Germany, Croatia, Hungary, the political, it was a huge political crisis, and more tough talk coming from the governments themselves. Barriers were being set up. And what happened was that it was undermining the very basis of the European Union, which was the free movement of goods and people. So the Schengen visa was almost thrown into the dustbin, because to staunch the refugees, to screen them, to have some kind of control over them, country after country started reinforcing the borders that had been taken away earlier as a point of huge pride for the Europeans. And in Germany also, I mean, while Cologne was, of course, a specific horrible incident which should be analyzed by itself, but the fact is that there has been right-wing opposition to Angela Merkel's humanistic policies, which otherwise have been admired the world over.
And these right-wing parties are getting a lot of support from the common public as well.
At a time like this, absolutely. At a time like this, right-wing parties make hay, because the situation is such that their usual rhetoric about loss of jobs, about law and order, about immigrants who do not share their culture, destroying society and so on, this bubbles up and gets them support.
So where does this leave the migrants now? Because it's a difficult situation for them, because they have nothing back home, and now going into these European countries is going to get more and more difficult.
It is going to be, I mean, the refugees are, the miserable of the earth. Unfortunately for them, it is not just right-wing backlash that is hitting them, going to hit them even more, but another couple of things which have exacerbated the situation as far as they are concerned. Number one is the linking of the refugee wave with the other huge problem facing the world, especially the West, and highlighted by Paris, which is terrorism. More and more voices, particularly from the right wing, are saying that most of these refugees are not just refugees from the violence in the Middle East. They're economic refugees. They just come here to grab our jobs and, better themselves. Plus, many of them are using the refugee wave as a cover for introducing, the terrorist groups are introducing terrorists in our midst.
It's a way of
and
infiltrating.
Paris highlighted that. So you take a combination, this explosive cocktail of a stagnant economy, world economy, especially the Western economies, where there's fear of jobs, high unemployment. You link it with a huge influx of refugees, far, far bigger than recent normal years. And you put together this fear of terrorism, which has actually hit Europe more than once. And you've got a cocktail that is a huge political crisis for Europe and the West.
It is a huge political crisis. It remains to be seen how it's going to be handled in the next few months, because they're going to be extremely crucial. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us.
Thank you, Frank.
Well, on that note, we'll take a short break here. But on the other side, a second batch of desperately needed aid reached Madaya in Syria amid civilians there starving to death. There's that and much more still to come. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, threatening ripples from North Korea's hydrogen bomb test last week. Any hopes of repair between the South and North glimpsed last year are firmly on the back burner again. It's back to aggression and propaganda tactics, and a fragile peace between the two countries that are technically still at war looks more tentative than ever. Here's more.
The one sees the hydrogen bomb test as an achievement, a celebration of military prowess, what it calls a deterrent for predators like the US and South Korea. For southern neighbor South Korea and arch-rival US, it was another sign of aggression, further raising the threat of nuclear weapons in irresponsible hands, one that calls for strong reprimand and check. Tensions on the Korean peninsula between an isolated north and US-leaning south are close to breaking point again in the new year.
North Korea is trying to upgrade its nuclear capability, and that means threats to our country are increasing. Jealous of the successful test of our first hydrogen bomb, the US and its followers are driving the situation to the brink of war by saying they have resumed psychological broadcast and brought in strategic bombers.
And this is perhaps the biggest warning yet to Kim Jong-un's latest eccentricities. America's B-52 jet capable of carrying nuclear weapons was joined by 2 fighter planes, a US F-16 and a South Korean F-15, in a low flight over Osan Air Base near Seoul, only a flypast but looking to send out a strong message. The United States and South Korea are in talks towards sending further strategic assets to the Korean peninsula. The Osan Air Base, operated jointly by the two countries, has become a symbol of sorts, reaffirming the alliance against North Korea's provocation. About 28,500 US troops are stationed in South Korea in joint defense with the South's forces against North Korea.
The United States remains steadfast in its commitment to the defense of the Republic of Korea and maintaining the stability on the Korean peninsula, to include extended deterrence provided by our conventional forces and our nuclear umbrella.
With all the minor peace measures of 2015 pulled out, a barrage of propaganda broadcasts by the South along the heavily militarized North-South border that was suspended last year are firmly back in place. South Korea's parliament had passed a resolution denouncing North Korea's 4th nuclear test. Nuclear envoys from the US, Japan and South Korea met in Seoul to discuss North Korea, as the South warned it was preparing a strategy of bone-numbing pain to the North.
I hope the Chinese authorities agree with us that we simply cannot take the business-as-usual approach to this latest provocation. We'll be working very closely with them to come up with a meaningful resolution.
North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, the undisputed head of what is among the most isolated nations of the world, bases his ideology on standing up to the United States. Military might and missile testing is virtually all that ever comes out of North Korea. The scenario, as it were, is oriented to conflict, an ongoing state of being at war. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Moving on now, after Paris and Istanbul, Indonesian capital Jakarta felt terror firsthand this week. Islamic State militants launched a gun and bomb assault in the city on Thursday, leaving 7 dead and 17 wounded. It took security forces about 3 hours to end the siege near a cafe and Jakarta's oldest departmental store after a group of around 7 militants traded gunfire with police and blew themselves up. A police officer and a Canadian man were killed. 5 of the militants blew themselves up. 2 militants were taken alive. The drama played out on the streets and on TV screens, with at least 6 explosions and a gunfight in a movie theatre. Jakarta's police chief said the Islamic State was behind the attack. The last major militant attack in Jakarta happened in 2009. Indonesia's anti-terrorism force has arrested 3 people linked with the attacks. Investigations, meanwhile, continue. Well, here are some other big stories that made headlines across the world this week in our segment Globe Watch.
Multiple terror attacks hit Iraq, leaving the biggest death toll in 3 months. Gunmen detonated suicide vest inside a shopping complex in capital Baghdad, and a car bomb exploded nearby, killing at least 18 people. 2 bombs later went off in the eastern town of Muqdadiya, killing at least 20 people and wounding another 50. Another blast in a southeastern Baghdad suburb killed 7 more. Islamic State militant claimed responsibility, saying it targeted rejectionist heathens, its derogatory term for Shiite Muslims. Kurdish rebels detonated a car bomb at a police station in southeastern Turkey's Diyarbakir on Thursday, then attacked it with rocket launchers and firearms, killing 5 people including civilians. 39 others were injured. This attack came a day after a suicide bomber detonated a bomb in Istanbul's main tourist district, killing 10 Germans. Clashes between Turkey's security forces and the rebels of the Kurdistan Workers' Party or PKK reignited in July, shattering a fragile peace process. The group is considered a terror organization by Turkey and its Western allies. A second batch of desperately needed aid reached a besieged Syrian town and 2 trapped villages as the United Nations accused rival factions of committing war crimes by causing civilians to starve to death. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which monitors the war, said 8 trucks had entered the town of Madaya near the border with Lebanon and the villages of Kefraya and Al-Fua in Idlib province in the northwest. Syrian state media said 6 trucks had gone into Madaya. For months, tens of thousands have been blockaded by government troops in Madaya and surrounded by rebel forces in the 2 villages. Egypt's first parliament in 3 years is off to a rocky start, with flamboyant displays of support for the president and general rowdiness leading to a cut-off of live coverage after just 2 sessions and drawing ridicule even from pro-government media. The 596-seat assembly is packed with supporters of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who led the military's overthrow of an elected and popular Islamist president in 2013.
Well, moving on now, US President Barack Obama's 2-term White House stint is in wind-up mode. With just about a year to go at the helm, America's first African-American president, in his final State of the Union speech, rejected the politics of tribalism and fear that have rocked the campaign to find his successor, took on critics and held up the threat of terror plaguing the world for many years to come. Here's more.
America has led a coalition of more than 60 countries to cut off ISIL's financing, disrupt their plots, stop the flow of terrorist fighters, and stamp out their vicious ideology. With nearly 10,000 airstrikes, we're taking out their leadership, their oil, their training camps, their weapons. We're training, arming, and supporting forces who are steadily reclaiming territory in Iraq and Syria. For even without ISIL, even without al-Qaeda, instability will continue for decades in many parts of the world. In the Middle East, in Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan, in parts of Central America and Africa and Asia. Some of these places may become safe havens for new terrorist networks. Others will just fall victim to ethnic conflict or famine, feeding the next wave of refugees.
No missing the dark forecast for Pakistan in Barack Obama's swan song, his last State of the Union address. On the domestic front, a much focused on aspect, President Obama admitted his own failures to heal political divisions in Congress, calling it a lasting disappointment of his tenure.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better.
There was strong reference to falling political standards, an obvious, though no names taken, attack on Republican Donald Trump.
And that's why we need to reject any politics that targets people because of race or religion. Let me just say this. This is not a matter of political correctness. This is a matter of understanding just what it is that makes us strong. The world respects us not just for our arsenal. It respects us for our diversity and our openness and the way we respect every faith. His Holiness Pope Francis told this body, from the very spot that I'm standing on tonight, that to imitate the hatred and violence of tyrants and murderers is the best way to take their place.
He spoke of climate change and the state of the American economy, its military prowess, listing out often glazed-over achievements of the last 7 years of his presidency.
Anyone claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction. If you doubt America's commitment, or mine, to see that justice is done, just ask Osama bin Laden. Ask the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, who was taken out last year, or the perpetrator of the Benghazi attacks, who sits in a prison cell. When you come after Americans, we go after you. And it may take time, but we have long memories, and our reach has no limits. Surveys show our standing around the world is higher than when I was elected to this office, and when it comes to every important international issue. People of the world do not look to Beijing or Moscow to lead, they call us.
The final State of the Union address is an unofficial marker of sorts for the nation moving into election mode for the next US president. The Iowa caucus in February will begin the process of finalization of the Democrat and Republican candidates for the final big race. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, let's now shift focus to the world of sports and bring you some big news from sporting arenas around the world in our segment Sports Action. Sania Mirza and her Swiss partner Martina Hingis on Thursday broke a 22-year-old world record by winning their 29th women's doubles match in a row. The world number one pair survived the scare and came from behind to beat the pair of Romanian Raluca Olaru and Kazakhstan's Yaroslava Shvedova 4-6, 6-3, 10-8 in a closely fought contest. They surpassed the pair of Puerto Rican Gigi Fernandez and Belarus's Natasha Zvereva, who won 28 matches on the trot during their successful pairing back in 1994. World number ones Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams have been announced as the top seeds for the first Grand Slam of the season, the Australian Open, which starts from Monday. The Serbian will aim to clinch his sixth title, while Williams, who is recovering from a knee injury, is looking forward to bag her seventh Australian Open title. Andy Murray has been named as the second seed ahead of 17-time Grand Slam champion Roger Federer. Meanwhile, Stan Wawrinka and Rafael Nadal are placed at 4th and 5th respectively. Barcelona forward Lionel Messi won the Ballon d'Or award for the world's best player for the 5th time. The 28-year-old Argentine got 41.33% of the vote, with second-place Real Madrid forward Cristiano Ronaldo getting 27.76%. Messi's teammate at Barca, Neymar, was voted third with 7.86% votes. United States midfielder Carly Lloyd, who scored a hat-trick in the World Cup final, won the Women's Award. English coach Mark Sampson was beaten to the Women's Football Coach of the Year award by USA boss Jill Ellis. The FIFA Emergency Committee has sacked Jerome Walker from the post of Secretary General of the world's football governing body. Confirming the news, FIFA said that their emergency committee has decided to dismiss Walker with immediate effect, terminating his employment. The 55-year-old was earlier handed a provisional suspension from football-related activities for his alleged involvement in a scam. With his dismissal, the acting Secretary General Marcus Katner will take over the duties of the post. And finally, The Revenant, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, took home the Golden Globes for Best Film, Best Actor and Best Director in the drama category at a glitzy Beverly Hills dinner packed with Hollywood's A-list celebrities. Among the other winners, The Martian, Joy and Creed. I'll leave you today with these glimpses of the star-studded evening. See you again next time.